People in 1956, when former British Prime Minister Clement Attlee visited India, the then governor of Bengal asked him one important question. He asked that after the Quit India movement subsided in 1942, there were no significant freedom movements in India. Then in spite of having the opportunity to rule India, why did the Britishers leave? To which Clement Attlee said that the role played by Netaji's army was paramount in India being granted independence, while the role played by the non-violent movement was dismissed as minimal. And this one statement itself is enough to question the version of history taught in our school textbooks. People, as much as we are taught about legends like Mahatma Gandhi and the significant contribution of Satyagraha movement, we are knowingly or unknowingly not taught about the significant sacrifices made by Netaji and his Azad Hind Fauj. Which is why in this episode today, we are going to dig into an important chapter of Indian history that has been erased from our history textbooks or perhaps not taught well enough. And that is, who was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose? What was this legend's contribution towards the independent struggle of our nation? And most importantly, how did his contribution give us freedom from the shackles of the Britishers? So listen to what I'm saying very carefully, and if you also believe India must know about the contribution of Netaji, then please share this video with as many people as possible.
This is Subhash Chandra Bose speaking to Indians in East Asia. My countrymen in East Asia, while I am in Tokyo, I desire to address a few words to you.
This is a story that dates back to 1897 India, when Netaji was born. This is when India was completely at the mercy of the colonial rulers, and all thanks to their kindness, India was sinking in poverty. While on one side we were shipping premium goods made in India to the royal families in England, here in India, lakhs of Indians were starving to death because of famines. During this time, very few families could actually afford a decent standard of living, and fortunately, Netaji's family was among these handful of people. But as Netaji started growing, he started noticing the atrocities caused by the Britishers in India. He started noticing that these Britishers came to our own motherland and had the audacity to put out boards outside hotels which said, "Dogs and Indians not allowed." He took them so personally that when he saw his college professor harass the Indian students, he even slapped him, for which he got rusticated from the Presidency College. After that, Netaji's father sent him to London to study for ICS or Indian Civil Service, which was by far one of the toughest exams in the world. This exam was so tough that even the most brilliant students used to flunk in spite of studying for 2 years. But Netaji was such a genius that he happened to clear the exam with just 6 months of study. And this was baffling even for the Britishers who held these exams. But as soon as he was offered the job, he rejected it and returned back to India. Why? Because he believed that in spite of knowing the fact that his motherland was in trouble, in spite of seeing the pathetic condition of people in India, it would be wrong for him to turn his back on his motherland while she was crying for help. This is when Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose left London, came to India and joined Gandhiji and his team to fight for India. And this is what marked the beginning of Netaji's freedom struggle. And within just a few months, because of his charismatic personality and brilliant political acumen, he began climbing the ladders of Congress more quickly than anyone else. He became so popular that in the presidential elections of the Congress, he ended up defeating Dr Patil, who was backed by Gandhiji himself. But as we all know, Netaji and Gandhiji had different ideologies. Gandhiji was all about seeking independence through non-violence, whereas Netaji believed that independence is not something that you request for, it's something that you fight and snatch from the rulers. Or in Hindi, as they say, Azadi mangi nahi, chhini jati hai. But as we all know, that is something that they both never came to terms with. And as time passed, Netaji realized that he cannot drive the people of Congress against Gandhiji's ideologies. So in 1939, in spite of being the president, he resigned from Congress and left as a lone wolf to find another way to free India. And this is where the historic journey of Netaji began. Now by this time, World War II had started. On one side, while Hitler was ravaging through Europe, on the other side, the Japanese did not just dominate Asia, but also started preparing to wage a war against the United States itself. And Hitler had caused so much damage that, let alone colonies, the Britishers were almost on the verge of losing their own country. And this is where Netaji saw an opportunity. He saw that in the race of fighting the Nazis and the Japanese, the British army was spread all across the world, because of which in India, only the upper management of the army were Britishers, whereas the entire frontline army had only Indian soldiers. And as far as my research is concerned, the numbers say that while there were 40,000 British soldiers in India, we had 25 lakh frontline Indian soldiers. And Netaji thought if he could somehow get those 25 lakh soldiers to revolt, the Britishers will have no other option but to leave India. But in order to make that happen, the soldiers needed a big push that could form the rebellion. And this is where Netaji's international relations strategy paid off. He realized that since the Japanese, Germans and the Russians were the enemies of the British Raj, they would be more inclined to help him out. So on 17th of January 1941 at 1:30 am, Netaji disguised as a Pathan and went from India to Afghanistan, from Afghanistan to Russia, and when the Russians did not help him out, he went to Germany, and that is where he met Adolf Hitler. But after some time he realized that Hitler was not in a position to help him out, so he finally comes to Japan. Now listen to this very carefully. The situation with the Japanese was that they anyways wanted to attack the Britishers, and if you remember from the Singapore video, in the Battle of Singapore in 1942, less than 10,000 Japanese troops defeated and took 64,000 British soldiers as prisoners of war. And out of these 64,000 soldiers, close to 40,000 soldiers were Indian soldiers who were fighting on behalf of the British Raj. And these Japanese were so smart that they thought instead of sending their own army to defeat the British Raj in India, why not send these Indian soldiers as a separate army unit to fight the Britishers in India? So they formed an army unit out of them and recruited Captain Mohan Singh as the in charge of the army. And this army was called as the Indian National Army or the Azad Hind Fauj. But the problem with this army was that the soldiers had completely lost their motivation because they almost felt like scapegoats who were being used for the greed of power. But you know what, guys? This is where Netaji came in. As he took control of the Azad Hind Fauj in 1943, he started delivering speeches to motivate the soldiers and established a purpose for them, that is to free India from the British Raj. He sat with them, he ate with them, and he reinstated the lost patriotism in the soldiers. This is when in one of the iconic speeches, Netaji uttered the words that will echo through the tunnels of time forever, wherein he said, "Tum mujhe khoon do, main tumhe azadi dunga." And because of this infectious enthusiasm, the Indian National Army was ready to fight with the strength of 40,000 soldiers. And one of these regiments was the Rani of Jhansi regiment, which was an all-women regiment. This is where Netaji found three incredible commanders whose names were Prem Kumar Sehgal, Shahnawaz Khan and Gurbakh Singh Dhillon. And these three commanders, ladies and gentlemen, took the Indian National Army all the way from Singapore to Myanmar, from Myanmar to Kohima and from Kohima to Impal. And here's where they encountered the British Army, which by the way was full of Indian soldiers. So practically, two armies of Indians were fighting at each other while the Britishers let them die in the hands of their own brothers. And unfortunately, the British Army ruthlessly defeated the Azad Hind Fauj. Within some time, the Japanese also surrendered, and to make matters worse, news came out saying Netaji had died in a plane crash. And while the nation was mourning the loss of this legend, something crazy happened. As it turns out, until this point, nobody in India knew that the Indian National Army was formed by Netaji and the fact that they were coming to India not to fight for the Japanese but for the freedom of India herself. And this was because the Britishers very cleverly censored the press because they knew that if Indians came to know that an entire army is coming to fight for them, these 25 lakh soldiers will start revolting and the rebellion will go out of control. But now that they had complete control of the prisoners, they made one big mistake. The Britishers thought about launching a psychological attack on the Indians, and they wanted to set an example to show us what could happen to us if we revolted against the Britishers. So they decided to conduct a public trial on the three commanders of Netaji, who were Dhillon, Sehgal and Shahnawaz. This trial, ladies and gentlemen, is known as the Red Fort trial, which was held in November 1945, wherein these three commanders were about to be given a harsh punishment so that no Indian ever dares to stand against the Britishers. And it was marketed through press almost as if it was an invitation for a sensational event. But you know what? What followed next was a catastrophe beyond their imagination. As it turns out, because of this marketing of the Red Fort trial, everybody in India came to know about the Azad Hind Fauj and the fact that Netaji had formed this army to free India from the British Raj. And guess what? Just like Netaji strategized, the moment the Indian soldiers in the British Army came to know about the Indian National Army, all these soldiers, including the Navy, started revolting. And as the news spread, it started snowballing into a rebellion that the Britishers had never seen before. Lakhs of people took to the streets, thousands of people started marching with Netaji's photo, and some of them directly started beating up the British Army. And even the British Indian Army and Navy started protesting with Netaji's photo. This event is famously known as the Naval Mutiny of 1946. Furthermore, hundreds of people gathered outside the Red Fort and started screaming slogans like हिंदुस्तान की एक आवाज सैगल दिल्लो शानवाज 40 करोड़ की एक आवाज सैगल दिल्लो शानवाज. And just like Netaji thought, when 25 lakh Indian soldiers started uniting against a meager 40,000 British officers, the Britishers saw no other option but to retract. And this panic had such a ripple effect that within no time in 1946, a cabinet mission is set up which stated the transfer of power, interim government is formed, and on 20th of February 1947, the British Prime Minister Clement Attlee declared that the Britishers would quit India by June 1948. Therefore, the Red Fort trial was one of the most crucial events in Indian history, because of which we got our independence on 15th of August 1947. This is that one important chapter in history that is usually not covered elaborately in history textbooks. And you know what? The most disturbing fact of all is that after Nehruji took charge, the last Viceroy of India, that is Lord Mountbatten, he did not even allow the INA soldiers to be a part of the Indian Army, and they did not get any recognition, and even their families did not get pensions until the 1970s. This is the story of the unsung heroes of our independence. Now, whether this important story of the Red Fort trial is deliberately not taught to us or is coincidentally overlooked, I don't know. But what I know for sure is that every Indian must be taught about these important lessons of our nation, so that we value and recognize the contributions of those heroes who shed their blood so that you and I can sleep in peace. And if you also believe the same, please share this video with as many people as possible. Because as they say, one individual may die for an idea, but that idea after his death will incarnate itself in 1,000 lives. In this case, it is the idea of one of the greatest freedom fighters of India, whose name was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Jai Hind.